Hey everybody, it's Jim here, and today I thought it would be a good time to revisit the topic of the Neural DSP Quad Cortex. I've had it for over 5 months, so I'm going to be brutally honest about whether or not I regret the decision of purchasing it in the first place, or whether I still love it. Now I'm going to start off with the positives. The main reason I bought this still holds up true to this day. I wanted to be able to use it live, have my wife run through it, as well as the vocals, a bass guitar, and my guitar. And then on top of that, be able to track it right into Pro Tools to capture every single performance. In that aspect, Quad Cortex has not let me down. Now, moving on to the extended usage of it after 5 months of using it, all the rotary encoders that double as the kind of switches, really good quality. Haven't had any issues with any of them starting to go out. The screen, it's rock solid. This device was not put together really cheap. It felt substantial when I first got it, and it's definitely held up over time in that aspect. The second major positive I have to say in regards to the Quad Cortex is its ability to capture your own gear. I had the JHS Morning Glory Throwback, the limited edition pedal, and I really liked that pedal. I never thought I was ever going to want to get rid of it. However, when I captured it, I noticed almost no difference in the sound from the Quad Cortex's capture to the unit itself. So I put in a few other settings, saved a few other captures of it, and I ended up being able to sell that thing and get out of it for pretty much exactly what I put into it while having the device still available on the Quad Cortex. Another thing I love about the Quad Cortex is the user interface, and that's for a few reasons. First of all, it's very easy to see. It's very easy to move around with. I mentioned rotary encoders before. They work fantastic. But if you're in a pinch, say your amp dies or there's some other kind of power situation, I was able to make a patch in 2 minutes on the Quad Cortex in a dark bar and get going and play the whole gig with absolutely no problems, and it sounded damn well good enough. So for me, it gives me that peace of mind where I can rely on this piece of gear. If something else was to go, I could easily just run right through this and be just fine. And while there are a bunch of other things I really like about the Quad Cortex, the last thing I'm going to mention as being a home run to me is how well this thing works with Pro Tools. Now, I can't speak on people's behalfs that use Logic, Ableton, any other kind of DAW. I've always been a Pro Tools user, but this thing integrates so well with it. It is so simple to get things going, and it's so simple if you don't love a sound that you've done wet to just have the dry track reamp via the Quad Cortex itself, and that's just down to the internal routing. They did a really good job of doing that, having dedicated sends of the dry signal, dedicated sends for going back into reamp, and then obviously dedicated sends to be able to record the wet signal that you get from the Quad Cortex in the very first place. This makes mixing very simple. This makes minor alterations without losing, if you have a great performance, you don't have to retrack it again. And this isn't anything new. There's a lot of ways to reamp things and do things of this kind of manner. AB boxes, always plugging into an interface or a console with the drive feed, but as far as just one guitar plugged into one thing right into the computer, this is as easy as it gets. And before I get into some of the criticisms I have of the Quad Cortex, I have to mention how great the actual people at Neural DSP are. When I had my major problem and mine bricked on me, I had a new one 3 business days later from Finland, all the way to the United States. These guys are not messing around. They're very active on the Discord server. They like to engage with the community. They like to talk. They like to hear feedback for the most part, and they're working really hard to make this thing as good as it can be, and I really do appreciate that. Now let's move on to some of the criticisms that I have of the Quad Cortex. The first one being there is still no plugin implementation. I have the Soldano plugin from Neural DSP that I purchased ages ago. I love it. I think it sounds great. And you might be thinking, well, the Quad Cortex also has a Soldano amp built into it. When you A and B them, there's a noticeable difference in my book. I greatly prefer the plugin's tones over the ones that come with the unit itself. And that's a problem because I would have thought by now there would have been that. That would have been something that would have been in one of the first few kind of patches and firmware updates, but it simply isn't to be yet. The second criticism I have of the Quad Cortex is there is still no desktop editor. Now that's a problem for a few reasons. First of all, to take full advantage of one of the positives that I mentioned earlier in the video, and that is the reamping inside of your DAW, you would have to physically move your quad cortex to a position for where you're mixing. It's not reasonable to kind of be sitting where I'm sitting and have the computer over there and tweak things around a little bit and have it go over to Pro Tools when there's so many other companies that offer similar products where the desktop editor takes care of that for you. You leave the quad cortex on the ground, you do everything through the app. As far as cloud backups and all of that stuff goes, same thing. I really dislike the fact that I need to be connected to Wi-Fi from the device itself and from my hotspot because it doesn't always find my modem when I'm trying to update the device. So a way to use a computer-based program to update the device, to use the desktop editor, that's something that is much needed. Next, the fact that there's no global EQ setting on this device. Even the HX Stomp had that, and it's something where you're building a preset, you have to keep that in mind every single time, whereas with other brands, like I just mentioned with Line 6, it's something that you have full control over, and it just acts as a master kind of setting. I would love to see that put into the Quad Cortex sooner rather than later. And one feature I'd really like to see Neural DSP implement on the Quad Cortex is the ability to change the LED color depending on which foot switch you're choosing. Me, for example, I use a bunch of reverbs and I basically use a bunch of drives. Those are pretty much my go-tos. For my modulation, I use external pedals, but I need to be able to know which one is which without simply just looking down at the gigging screen. I would prefer to just have a red, a purple, and a blue versus just they're all the same exact color, because when you're at a club, it might not be the easiest to read the screen itself, whereas a color is much easier to tell a difference, especially once you're used to the rig that you've built. And while I'm on the topic of effects, this is something that bothers a lot of other people. Doesn't really hinder me too much because I already kind of told you how I use the Quad Cortex with my external pedals for effects. More effects to be added into the unit would be great, and tweaking of them in kind of quicker time like they did with the flanger. The new flanger came out, they fixed that pretty much straight away, and that was a really good kudos to them. However, the sheer number of effects available pale in comparison when you're looking at the other kind of brands that offer similar products. Now, there are other things that people criticize the Quad Cortex for still not having: a looper, a better cloud-based system, stuff like that. But overall, that's pretty much all the negative I have in regards to how I use it and my feelings on the device. Okay, so now that we've acknowledged some of the things that I love about the Quad Cortex, and we've also gotten into some things that I'm pretty disappointed about as a whole, overall, I don't regret it one bit. I'm very happy with the device because the main things I needed it to use it for, it excels at, and it excels at it now. There are some things where it's going to improve a lot my experience with the device, especially when it comes to the tracking. I really want a desktop editor, you guys. But as a whole, I think that the positives outshine the negatives in my specific situation. Granted that I wanted to be using it live, capturing the performances live, and not just a guitar player. So for me, it's still a win. I think they have a long way to go to really live up to the expectations that they themselves kind of set out when they launched this device, but I'm happy with it and I have no intentions of selling it anytime soon. And if you made it this far into the video and you have a Quad Cortex, or you're somebody that's still on the fence about it, leave me a comment. Let me know what you love about it and what you think the device is needing in order to become a true competitor to some of the other manufacturers out there. I'm always interested in seeing what you guys have to say. Other than that, leave a like on the video if you like what I'm doing on this channel. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you tomorrow for another guitar-related video. Take it easy, you guys.